Brumbies versus Lions. Wow. Where do we start? Where do we start? Keep yourself outside of yourself. Do the acting. Brumbies. Lions. Okay. Not a good start. We'll do it. We'll get there. We're going to get there. Lions. Brumbies. Starting off, first point. Brumbies are the best team that the Lions have played thus far, other than Argentina. So it was always going to be a tougher test. And I think it was a good test to test what I think a lot of people would think would be the test starters. Going through from 1 to 15, I think a lot of these players will be test starters. The only exceptions I think that are questionable are maybe Tom Curry at 7, Ollie Chesham at 6, maybe Bundyaki at 12, but we'll get into why that's a question mark. And fullback of Blair Kinghorn, and that's mainly injury based. I think overall, if you're looking at this as the final team that's working its way up to playing Australia in a week's time, there's a huge amount of positives. Again, there's a slow start. Again, ill discipline leads the Brumbies to get an early score, and it was poor to begin with. It was poor. The Brumbies got the early score. I think the Lions showed that they were feeling pressure. They certainly had a lot of energy in both attack and defence, but I would argue there was probably a bit too much energy in attack. There was some early mistakes, but then it all started to click into place, and we all started to kind of see this attacking system just get there and gel. And what I'm talking about is that, I think a lot of the criticisms of this attack has been support runners are too close to the attacker. The ball just gets fired into them sometimes and the passes are off. But now we're starting to see the advantages of this support play, of players, playing right up against the ball carrier, getting the ball and making game line success from that. We started to see that work a lot more today. It certainly was present in a lot of the tries that happened today, which a lot of them were real beauties to watch. I'm thinking about the Gary Ringrose one, where he kind of just makes a break, gives it to Marcus Smith. Marcus Smith kicks it through, Ringrose recollects. It's absolutely gorgeous. Marcus Smith was involved in quite a lot of these tries, actually, but in general, the attack, is kind of like a tick. We know where it's going. It looks great. Still, the only concern that I have is that it's quite a quick decision that the attacker that's in support needs to make, whether they're going to be going into the breakdown or whether they're there for the pop-off. And if they misjudge it and the pop-off's not there, they run past and then the attacker gets isolated. That happened once or twice in this game, probably more times than that, to be honest. And I think the Wallabies will look at that as something that they can definitely take advantage of, especially with the forwards that they have, very mobile forwards. Fraser McWright, Rob Valentini are going to be nightmares to clear out. I'm even thinking of people like Tupou and Angus Bell, nightmares to try and clear out when they're going over for a jackal. But for the most part, it looked better. The handling errors are still massive. They are happening way too often for this point in the tour. And if you're expecting a lot of these guys not to be playing on Saturday, then, they kind of just need to get it right on the day, which is fine. I feel like, the Waratahs game was a bit of a step back. I think we're back to just past the form of the Queensland Reds form. I think the counter-attack started off looking a little bit ticky-tacky, trying to pop it off a little bit too much rather than just having direct runners set up and go and keep it quick, but keep it structured. And okay, so let's talk about some other elements here, right? So Kinghorn, he comes off pretty early on in this game, and a lot of people were thinking he's probably going to be the out-and-out 15 starter for the Wallabies tests. This is a bit of a blow to the squad for a number of reasons. If he is injured, depending on the severity of the injury. First of all, his replacement is Keenan, who is no bad replacement, but he's played one game of rugby in the last kind of 2 months, and that was for the Lions, and it was a very rusty performance. So if you're asking him to start at 15 against the Wallabies, you're asking a lot of someone to play up to their usual standard to do that. And it's also another double whammy as well. And I said this in my video for the Tars, Owen Farrell being included in the squad. Now, if Kinghorn is injured for any extended period of time, you either got Hugo Keenan, who's had injury troubles and is rusty, Marcus Smith, who's okay. But he gets caught out defensively in 15. That's just, and under the high ball, he's obviously not the biggest guy. You haven't got an out-and-out 15 outside of that. And if you do want to bring somebody in, then, you've lost a week of being able to acclimatise within the squad, gel within the squad. You're asking someone to basically come off the street and come straight into the tour and contribute straight away at that 15 shirt, which is a lot to ask. So like when you kind of put my statement out there about Owen Farrell and I had the comments come back, and then I've seen other people that are on YouTube or on the TV talking about like, this is why Owen Farrell's in the squad. Yes, Owen Farrell's a hell of a player. He's a hell of a leader. And it might be that he doesn't have any game time whatsoever. He's just there as from a leadership point of view. But it comes at cost. And the cost is now you possibly got one injured fullback. You've got another fullback that is not in form and is still rusty. And you've got someone who's kind of like a pseudo fullback who can have weaknesses in certain things that are very obvious to the Wallabies. So don't come at me with like, this is why Farrell's in the squad. Just stop. No, it feels like it was a mistake at this point. Gary Ringrose is dragging Bundyaki into that starting test team for me. And again, I think this is, the positive is Ringrose was playing great. Bundyaki looked better. But I think a real dream centre partnership probably would have been Ringrose and Tuapolotu. But all the games leading up to this, those two as a centre partnership have had zero time to play together. It's either Aki and Ringrose or it's Tuapolotu and Jones. And you've never had any kind of like chop and change between those two combinations, which they're already very used to, when we could have gotten the best of both worlds, I think Jones has played very well, but I think Ringrose has played better. And I think Bundyaki's been okay, but I think Tuapolotu's been better. You have Tuapolotu in that 12 shirt, gels well with Finn Russell, works well with Gary Ringrose in terms of how they complement each other and how they play. It just feels like that would have been the ultimate centre partnership, but because they've had no game time together to get that right, it's unlikely. And now it's going to be Bundyaki and Ringrose in that centre partnership. So it's kind of like you're getting like an 8 out of 10 centre partnership, but you could have had a 10 out of 10. That feels like it was an error. But for the most part, this was great. It was a great game. I think Tom Curry, there were some players that were like questionable whether they were going to be the starters for the tests that were in this team. The one was Tom Curry, who I think really put his hand up to say like, everyone thinks it's going to be Jack Morgan or Josh van der Fleer. I'm here to tell you that I'm still to be considered. Work rate was incredible, got around the park, plenty of tackling, plenty of jackling. I'm a big fan of Tom Curry and I think he played very well today. Ollie Chesham in that 6 shirt is probably another one where him starting is a question mark. That I think that 6 shirt has been a question mark for the Lions throughout the whole tour, but I think Chesham played excellently today. He was kind of what a lot of people were expecting Cadeyrn would be able to add in that 6 shirt, the physicality of a second row, but the mobility of a 6. Byrne, I think, has struggled a little bit during the tour, being able to offer both of those things. Chesham comes in today. He looked like he was going to get injured early, but he actually goes through the whole game pretty much and delivers, I think, a real standout performance. So for me, I think the back row, starting in the tests, I think it has to be Morgan, Conan, and I think Chesham. I don't think Curry outperformed what Morgan did 2 games ago against the Reds. I still think Morgan's probably the out-and-out 7 to be playing in there. But I think Chesham probably definitely booked his spot into the tests if it was me that was being the selector for the first test. Gibson Park, Finn Russell, commanding performances. Finn Russell, from what I thought had a bit of dip in form about a year or 2 ago, I think in the last 4 months has really improved. Not only just in terms of the flair and what he can do with, the whoop, whoop, whoop and the whoop, but his control of the game. His understanding of the game, when to kick, when to run. Don't always just be all crazy and running all over the place and unpredictable. If the play's not on, stick it in the corner. You got the pack, even more so than you do with Scotland when you're playing for the British and Irish Lions, to put serious pressure on 5-metre line-outs. Use them, Use them to your advantage. Put your props, your second rows, your back rows, in positions to make plays. Don't just be the super flair guy be the control guy. And I think Gibson Park and Finn Russell did a great job of doing both of those things today. The wingers, Freeman, Lowe. I think that's it. Those are the wings combinations. James Lowe was obviously excellent with ball in hand, but it's not just that. It's his massive left boot that he uses to clear out. And, the restarts have been a problem for the Lions all tour. But one of the good ways and the cheat codes that they had today was James Lowe put it to the... Restart comes down, James Lowe, left boot, straight down the side of the pitch, right? And Tommy Freeman, maybe you don't have... I mean, he's still, very good at this, but maybe you don't have the individual danger that you do with Duhan van der Merwe. But defensively, Tommy Freeman is, light years ahead of what Duhan offers you. And there's not so much of a weakness, both under the high ball and also just, generally defensively. Joe McCarthy has had an excellent Lions tour, in my opinion. I think he was a bit out of form since he came back from injury for Leinster and Ireland. He was out for a bit, but now I think he's back to his best. And as I've said in previous videos, and as I'll continue to say, the Lions need big fucker appeal. And that's what Joe McCarthy brings you. Big fucker appeals on big on out today, big physicality, big guy. And I think he is really crucial for this test side to have that big guy ability. Tadhg Furlong, I think, had a great game. I think it was telling that he came off at 57 minutes. With all the injury troubles that he's had over the last few months or years even, I think they're saying, Tadhg looks good, he played great, get him off the pitch as soon as possible so we don't risk him for those Lions tests. I think he's probably going to be the starting tight head. If I'm honest with you, I think Finlay Bealham should be the substitute tight head. I think he's probably at a starting spot, but he's just unfortunate in the fact that one of the best players on the tour, when they're at their peak, is Tadhg Furlong, that is. Ellis Genge, I think, at Loosehead was excellent again today. I think he's probably booked himself in that starting jersey as well. And we don't need to say anything about Dan Sheehan, the pseudo-winger that hangs out on the wing. He was always going to be a starter. So, you could probably look at today, and if you're just watching the highlights, you're thinking, the Brumbies, they gave them something to struggle about. You know what? The Brumbies, I think, are an out-and-out better side than they've played for the entire tour, other than Argentina in Dublin, right? That just goes without saying. So the fact that it was more of a competition, I'm not too bothered about. I think this sets up nicely for Saturday. And it'll be interesting to see what happens on Saturday, who gets picked where. And it's because it's not just like you probably have an idea who your starters are, right? But it's not just that. It's you do still have a full week of no games from that Saturday all the way through to the first test. So you can still, those players that you're still not 100% sure about, which I will probably be saying is blindside and open side flanker, centre partnerships, maybe fullback, wingers, things that you're I kind of have an idea who's going to be the starter, but someone has a chance here. A lot of those guys you can have play on Saturday for a full 80 minutes. I'm thinking about Matt Hansen, who's been pretty good. Thinking about Marcus Smith being playing at 10, hopefully for an full 80 minutes. Maybe putting Tuapolotu together with Aki, or Tuapolotu with Jones. Or that's already happened. I mean, Tuapolotu with Ringrose. You could try that out, even if it's not for a full 80 minutes. You still have time for experimentation and to kind of just figure some little bits and pieces out. Fullback, I think, is probably the biggest question mark. It all depends really if there's an injury to Kinghorn that's serious, because if it is, that's big danger, big problems. But for the most part, Saturday, because of that gap between Saturday and then the next Saturday when the first test is, you can experiment a lot, even with players that you think will probably be starting. There's some players you want to protect. We talked about Tadhg Furlong just earlier. You want to protect him. Probably don't want to give him any game time whatsoever. Jack Conan, I would probably want to protect because I want to be playing what's 80 times 3, 80, 160. I probably want Jack Conan playing 240 minutes for the tests because he's been that solid at number 8. Henry Pollock is another one I think should be getting a full 80 minutes next on Saturday. Experiment with him, see if you can play him at 7, 8, 6. It's going to be interesting. So that's it. I think it was a lot more positive than against the Tars in general. Defensively, still some things to... I think it was a lot more positive in general. It was just the errors. It was the poor start, the lack of discipline, the penalties. and then the handling errors. It just feels like we can figure out those last 2 bits. We've got a solid team. We've got a solid chance in this series, especially with Lachie now being injured. That's a big question mark for the Wallabies at 10, but I fully expect Tom Liner to start in that 10 shirt. And if it's not, it's going to be Donaldson, who's very experienced, and if it's not him, it'll be James O'Connor, or it will be another option that's kind of boring, but we won't get into that. That's it for my review. God, it's been a bit of a slog getting to this point, doing 2 videos a week, but we're there, we're here, we're queer. Are we? We're here. We're here, we're loud, we're proud. We're watching rugby. One last game leading up to the tests on Saturday. I'll see you there.